Hey guys, my name is Jason Schuster. I'm a doctor of physical therapy. I own Intricate Art Spine and Body Solutions. It's a continuing education company teaching other doctors how to do a couple things. Today we're going to talk about nuclear factor kappa B and sirtuins. They're two sets of genes and proteins that are very important for metabolic health, overall homeostasis, and improving your health and well-being in general. Nuclear factor kappa B. This is a family of inducible transcription factors which regulates a large array of genes involved in different processes of the immune and inflammatory responses. So I sort of kind of think about NF-κB, the sirtuins, mTOR, and AMPK all in one group because they all improve health and they all rely on each other to improve health. And when they're all activated in the right amount, in the right ratios, they can really improve cellular health span and lifespan. So it's really exciting stuff, right? So we're just scratching the surface on this stuff, but these are some of the main pathways that are spoken about throughout the literature in longevity and improving health span and lifespan, right? So the NF-κB proteins are typically in the cytoplasm, and they can be, there's a whole family of NF-κB proteins, you guys, right? So they can be sequestered in the cytoplasm in the presence of some other proteins that inhibit the NF-κB protein from exiting the cytoplasm, right? So there's a gene that makes the NF-κB protein, and then the NF-κB protein is typically in the cytoplasm, and then if this other protein that's inhibitory goes away, the NF-κB can go out and do stuff, right? So remember, genes make proteins depending on the environment that the genes are in, right? They can make more than one protein. This is another really important thing to think about, you guys. DNA gets translated into RNA. The RNA can be made into numerous different proteins. One code of RNA does not guarantee in any way, shape, or form that the cell is going to produce that specific protein, right? What is much more important is what the cellular environment is that is going to determine if that RNA sequence does produce that specific protein, or if it produces a misfolded protein, or if it produces a different protein. And in that situation, our body knows what to do, right? So again, it's like, how does it know that's not the right protein? We don't understand that at all. But if proteins get misfolded or the wrong protein gets produced for that time and place, our body gobbles it up and recycles it and starts the process over. That process goes haywire when we lose energy out of our mitochondria. If we don't have enough ATP, our body loses its garbage disposal process and it can't clean up the mistakes it makes. Like, we tend to think like our body's doing stuff the right way, and more or less it is, which is absolutely amazing. But there are tons and tons of mistakes that happen all the time. It's just that we have so many amazing mechanisms in our body to make up for those mistakes and to clean them up and to start over that we just don't realize it. When we do realize it, you guys, is when that ability to correct those mistakes goes away, or it starts to get inhibited because we start losing mitochondrial function. When that happens, that's when cancer starts to happen, autoimmune diseases, idiopathic diseases, just weird random stuff, right? So very important stuff. Activation of NF-κB involves two major signaling pathways, and this is just kind of semantical, you guys, but this is how it's discussed in the literature, so I wanted to make you guys aware of it. They call it a canonical and a non-canonical pathway, right? It's just a terminology, meaning you don't have to pay attention to that too much. Just remember that there's two signaling pathways for NF-κB. The canonical pathway responds to a lot of different stimulus, including tumor necrosis factor receptor family. So TNF-alpha, or tumor necrosis factor alpha, is one of the most pro-inflammatory peptides in the body, and it's one that's spoken about in concussion literature, neurodegenerative literature, muscle sarcopenic literature, right? People with chronic sympathetic hyperactivity and chronic inflammation almost always have chronically elevated levels of tumor necrosis factor alpha, along with other pro-inflammatory cytokines like interleukin 1, interleukin 6. NF-κB works on the TNF-alpha pathway. So NF-κB reduces the amount of TNF-alpha floating around in the body. It reduces the amount of inflammation. It regulates autonomic nervous system homeostasis, and it allows expression or better expression of the sirtuin genes and the mTOR genes and all that stuff to allow for optimal cellular health and homeostasis, which translates into optimal health span and lifespan for human beings. There's a huge body of literature that talks about nuclear factor Kappa B, right, contributes to not only immunity, right, which in part it's doing so by reducing inflammation, but it specifically acts on inflammation. It helps with cancer, it helps with nervous system function, all that stuff helps with immunity. So again, all of these things are kind of working with each other, but it helps on numerous different pathways, right? So the canonical, or the more generalized NF-κB, that is involved in almost every level of our immune response, right? So if we don't have proper activation of NF-κB, one of the main elements, or one of the main proteins that our immune system needs to function properly is not going to be present, and it's not going to be able to function properly, which is going to lead to a significant degradation in health span and lifespan. Here's a diagram of NF-κB. This is a really good one, you guys. So I like these diagrams because a lot of this other stuff we mention in the other classes that we have about nutrition and supplementation, and a lot of this stuff is mentioned in other parts of this class too, right? So NF-κB goes to cytokines. We've talked a lot about cytokines, right? So NF-κB helps the inflammatory response through regulating cytokines like interleukin 1, interleukin 6, interleukin 2, right? Tumor necrosis factor alpha we just talked about. It helps regulate cell cycle survival. It helps regulate cellular cleanup or autophagy. It helps regulate angiogenesis, or the production of new blood cells, right? It helps regulate adhesions in soft tissues, macrophages, all of our different T cells. It just helps in a huge amount of it. These four things, you guys, these pathways that we're talking about here, they just seem to overall benefit human beings in a bunch of different ways, and if you can activate them more, people tend to be healthier. We can argue about the specific different ways in which this is working, and we're not going to know that for hundreds of years probably, but the bottom line is that they're safe to activate, and they lead to good outcomes for human beings, which is what I'm concerned with. I want things to be, if they're safe and the risk reward is reasonable, that's what I'm looking for. I want to help people right now. I want to know how they work too, but the main importance for me is it safe, and what does it do, and how does it act with other stuff? And we do know the generalized stuff about this, more or less, it seems like. Here's another good diagram about the SIRT genes and proteins, you guys. So there's epigenetic DNA modifications on the top. Another way to think about sirtuins is they're kind of like a DNA reader improver, if you want to think about that, or it's a better version of a DNA translator. So our DNA is what the DNA is. It's how the DNA gets read and what environment it's in that depends on what's going to happen. And sirtuins help the DNA get more accurately transcribed and translated into proteins that are more highly functional and that are not misfolded and that are just lead to more cellular homeostasis. So the sirtuins really important for neuroprotection, cardioprotection, glucose and fat metabolism, anti-inflammation, kidney protection, renal protection, liver protection, hematopoietic immunity, right? So our ability to make red blood cells and white blood cells and all that stuff. And it helps prevent genomic instability. So there's another little list here of what the different sirtuins are doing as far as SIRT1, 2, 3, deacetylase, SIRT4, ADP, ribosyl transferase, so that's another epigenetic mechanism, SIRT5, demyelinase, desuccinase, and deacetylase. Some of these things are hard for me to say, you guys. It's pretty funny. Demyelinase. There we go. SIRT6. Some of the same ones, ADP, ribulase, transferase, and deacetylase, SIRT7 deacetylase. So these are just the epigenetic mechanisms by which they're using to affect change in the human body, more or less, right? So those are all part of the epigenetic mechanisms. This is another good one, you guys. So I really like this one. So this one includes all of the different things that we're talking about in here into one diagram. And it's relatively simple, but it just gives you a good overall look at it, right? So caloric restriction, or not putting crap in your body that you don't need and not putting too much of it in there, right, puts your body into a protective state, or it stresses your cells to a point where they start to produce healthy protective proteins that improve healing and health overall, right? So caloric restriction helps with glucose, obviously, free fatty acids, reduces reactive oxygen production, right? Having elevated levels of NAD+, again, we talk about how to accomplish that in the nutrition and supplementation and peptide therapy classes. Increase levels of NAD+, improve the level of NAD+ to NADH ratio. That gives, so when NAD+ gets converted into NADH, an electron gets shot off a valence cell, or a valence ring of NAD+, and then it becomes NADH, and that electron is what the mitochondria use to produce ATP, right? So if we don't have enough NAD+, the mitochondria don't have their energy to produce ATP, we don't have our energy, ATP, and again, cyanide blocks NAD+ pathways immediately, you die instantaneously. So increasing NAD+ levels to a certain point seems to be the opposite of what instantly kills you, which to me seems pretty good. You got the AMPK induction, work on the sirtuin pathways. You got another pathway called the FOX pathway, NRF1 pathway. We got mTOR activity and autophagy, lysosomes, right? All sorts of stuff. So all of these things are helpful to stimulate at the same time with each other because they all act on each other in certain ways. And again, people that eat well and that exercise consistently and that do treatments like dry needling and joint manipulation on a relatively consistent basis, when you do testing on them, they just have far better ratios and activities of this stuff in the human body than other people do. And that's one of the ways that we're studying, like, okay, let's look at what do healthy people have going on in their body, okay, and then how can we make that stuff happen in unhealthy people, and let's see what happens. And a lot of the time that works. Thanks for listening, guys. This is part one. In part two, we're going to go over some more of the proteins, peptides, and pathways that are important in the neurophysiology of improving health and how to turn them on, and different methods and mechanisms by which you can do so. Here's a free link to our Intro to Nutrition course. It's the first of 5 nutrition courses that we have in our 5-course nutrition series. And if you take all 5 courses, they're 5 CEUs each, 25 CEUs total. That makes up our Intricate Art Nutrition Certification, IANC.